Hello, and welcome to Insightful Conversations with your host, Three Principles practitioner, Adey-Jones. Join her each week as she welcomes some of the world's leading Three Principles teachers and practitioners who share how this understanding has dramatically improved the quality of their lives and the lives of those they work with.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. I'm so thrilled to have as my guest Christine Heath. In addition to being one of the original students of Sydney Banks, Christine is a licensed marriage and family therapist in both Hawaii and Minnesota, as well as a nationally certified addictions counselor. As the co-founder of the Hawaii Counseling and Education Center, Christine has been helping people to understand the three principles for nearly 40 years. She's also a much sought-after world-renowned speaker on the principles. Thank you, Christine, and so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. What a thrill this is.
Oh, thank you. So I am going to have you share how you first came across the principles. I listened to you talk at the Manhattan conference, and it was a very, very funny story. So I'd love you to share that with my listeners today.
Okay. I had been a therapist for about 7 years, and this was in the 70s. So at that time, there was kind of some pretty interesting kinds of therapy. And I worked with women who were sexually and physically abused, which at the time, there was really nobody else doing that. So I was really kind of a pioneer in doing that. But in doing that, I got really burned out because kind of the way I thought you should do therapy is connecting with people's pain and suffering. So after doing that I had about 60 clients a week.
Wow.
So I was pretty burned out, and I was turning 30, and I just turned 30. And I really thought that if I found a man to marry me, I'd be much happier. So my friend, Joe Bailey, went to this training, and he came back and he said, this is really great new stuff. And by the way, I met my wife and this woman who became his wife, and she's really sweet and I really like her, blah, blah, blah. So he brought one of the speakers up a couple of months later, and everybody in my clinic decided to go. And I didn't want to be the one person left out, although going to a male psychologist at the time wasn't really something I thought I could learn much from. But I was sitting there and I thought, well, you never know when you might meet a man, and maybe going to psychology conferences instead of bars, I would be able to find someone that was willing to marry me. So I signed up, and I signed up for both days because the second day was optional, but I thought if I met a man the first day and I wasn't signed up, it would look too obvious if I signed up for the second day. So it was quite a scheming on my part. So I went to the training, and I was kind of the person in the audience that you hate to have in our audience, who's asking all the questions that are really argumentative and very negative, and the feeling I had was just very combative. And I remember that we broke for lunch, and at the time I had this clinic with about 10 other therapists, and we were all sitting together having lunch together, and we were talking about how what we were doing was good and that this really wasn't anything new, and what was the big deal. And we got up from the table. It was kind of a weird kind of thing that happened. Is I got up and I remember turning around, and everybody was kind of stuck in time, like where the main character in the TV show keeps walking and everybody else stops in time.
Yes. Yeah.
And that happened, and I thought, oh, weird. And then I turned around, and as I was walking out, Dr. Mills, who was the person that came up to do the seminar, was walking out at the same time. Now, by this time, I knew he was single, so I was thinking about dinner. And I thought, gee, maybe I should listen to him a little bit so that when I talk to him, I don't sound like I'm an idiot. And I remember we were walking toward the room, and he had the nicest feeling of any person I'd ever talked to. It was like kind of talking to velvet, when you stroke. Yeah, it was just a really beautiful feeling. And so I went in the afternoon session, and I thought, okay, I better pay attention here. So I'm listening And then the morning, I kind of thought everybody else in the room understood him because he would answer my questions, but I didn't understand him. It just like went over my head. And so the afternoon, I started listening, and I remember that. Now you have to understand that the times were interesting, but he said to focus on positive, and I thought, oh, positive, I could do positive. Now, at the time, positive was kind of considered malpractice because you weren't really concentrating on people's pathology. And then we had a break, and there was a physician there. And at the time, I thought that physicians being smart enough to make it through medical school were like one step down from God. And so I went up to this doctor, and I said to him, I said, well, what do you think about this? And he said, well, makes pretty good common sense to me. I thought, well, if a doctor thinks this is good, maybe I should listen. So I went back in the afternoon, the last session, and Roger put this diagram thing on the board, and all of a sudden I had this huge shift, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing everything backwards.
Wow.
I've been trying to fix things after people create that. No wonder I'm not happy and they're not happy.
Yeah.
So I started laughing, really. I laughed for about 3 days, but it was interesting because what I found what I was looking for was love. It just wasn't in the form that I thought it was.
Yeah.
Roger Ellis did not become my date, but he definitely pointed me toward the true source of love, which was within me.
That's so beautiful. I love that. And you were a really quick learner. I mean, you got it.
Yeah, I always say that life looked at me and said that they needed some teachers, and looked at me and said, you're one and you need to change a lot. So I kind of felt like somebody grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and yanked me up a few levels of awareness. And yeah, so I changed so much that people thought that I had joined the Moonies, or that I was on drugs, or that I'd met a man. That they'd never really seen a person change that much without attributing it to something on the outside.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was a very well-known therapist in Minneapolis. I was really pioneering the work in family violence, and people would call me up and say, Chris, we heard you flipped out. And I said, well, I think I flipped up. And if this is what flipping out is, you should try it, because I've never been happier in my life. And that was kind of it. Like, they couldn't really say anything because I was obviously a healthier human being. Like, the results really spoke for themselves. But yeah, I changed a lot. In fact, all of my clients, I think 3 people dropped out.
Wow.
And everybody else stayed. And what they said was that they could see that I was in a better place, and whatever I was doing, they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So it was like the blind leading the blind, because at that time there were no books, I had one cassette tape, those little cassette tapes that they used to have.
Yes.
And I would play that every day when I came home, a Sid Banks tape.
Wow.
And I listened to that sucker every day until I started talking in my groups. I'd start talking with an A, Canadian A. And I thought, okay, this is too much. Now I'm listening too much.
Well, at least you didn't have a Scottish brogue.
I didn't have a Scottish brogue, thank goodness. But
that would have been funny. So, I mean, that just speaks to it right there. I mean, your clients saw the change in you, so they trusted and they went along with you. So how did you transition from where you were in Minnesota to where you are now, and the beautiful, incredible place you have in Hawaii? So how did that come about?
Well, actually, by that time, Joe and I set up the first clinic based on the principles, and I was the executive director. And in that position, I was a little too hard on people. I could come across very harsh and really hard on people. And to me, I didn't think I was, because I was way harder on myself, but I did. And so Joe took me aside one day and he goes, Chris, you're a little bit too hard on people. And so I went home and cried for 3 days.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm a bad person. I'm supposed to be teaching this to people, and I can't do it myself. So I called up Sydney Banks, and I'm crying and crying. He said to me, I told him what the problem was. And he said, now, this is the thing. Sometimes we get in a low mood, and sometimes we get in a very low mood, like you are right now. Now, if you can see something about yourself that you'd like to change, just change it and forget it.
Yeah.
And then I think you should move to Hawaii and set up a clinic there. It's like, oh, great idea.
Wow.
And
So it's his suggestion?
yeah, what's the suggestion?
Wow,
And
amazing.
so I just said, yeah, that's good. And I just had no fear of it. I just knew that was the thing to do. So I talked 3 of my girlfriends into moving with me. And we moved over to Oahu, and getting here, we realized that it was masquerading as a state. It was really another country with its own culture and its own language, really, that everything was really different. So we had to kind of settle in for about a year and really learn how to live in a different feeling again.
Yeah. Wow.
And so we set up a clinic, and pretty soon I started getting some grants, and people used to, when we first moved to Hawaii, people in the mental health profession used to call us the Sunshine Girls because we were so happy, and
Yeah.
they'd never seen people in the mental health field that were that happy. And it was funny because my boyfriend at the time, I actually met my husband like 2 months after I got there. And I was dating him, and he was surfing one day, and another surfer was out there who was in charge of another employee assistance program. So they knew each other. And he said to me, he says, have you met these girls that are over in Kailua? They're like so positive. Are they on drugs or what? and my husband didn't tell him that he knew me. He goes, oh yeah, I know, but they're not on drugs. They're just pretty happy people.
Wow.
Goes, okay, interesting. So long story short, then we eventually grew to, at one point I had about 65 employees.
Wow.
Several big contracts, but the state then started to decide that they were going to tell us how to treat people, even though we had better results than anybody else.
Wow.
And so we moved out of that and downsized again. But yeah, so now we have offices on Oahu and on the Big Island.
Wonderful. Now, are most of your clients, I mean, I know you do a lot with, you're, as I said, a licensed addictions, or is it, let me make sure I'm getting, both, exactly. What would you say are the majority of your clients? What do they come in with? What do they?
You mean for the clinic or for me?
Well, for you, as a 3 principles. Now, are you strictly a 3 principles practitioner, or you still do the? Well, you don't do the regular therapy anymore. So yeah, when they come and see you, what do they usually? Are they usually dealing with addictions, or what has got them into seeing you?
I would say that most people start off by coming with some kind of an issue with another human being.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's like marriage, relationship, family, parenting. That's where most people start off from. Sometimes they also have addiction problems as a result of the level that they're living at. But I also work with a boarding school. And so I see a lot of really high functioning young teenagers that are pretty stressed out and having, lots of pressure that they put on themselves, really.
Yeah.
So I do that. And so I work with kids, I work with adults, I work with couples, I work with families. And we also work with vets. We have got a big caseload of veterans from VA with PTSD. And substance abusers that come in, anger management kinds of issues that come in.
I know that's the beauty of the principles. It's just across the board.
Yeah.
So how do you, when you first get a client coming in that just has no sort of concept of the inside out nature of life and is pretty sort of solidly stuck in their story, how would you first start to present what we see to somebody like that?
Well, what I do is I just get to know the person first of all. But in the way that I get to know them, I think it's just the whole, when you understand the principles, the way you interact with people is different.
Yeah. So
in the past, if people would tell me about some awful thing that happened, I would be like, oh my God, that's so terrible, that's awful. And I just don't do that now. Like I'll listen and empathetic with people, but that's like their problem is not the big deal to me. So what I'm listening for is I'm listening for how their help has come through them. And I usually start in that way, just to let them see how their innate state of mental well-being has always been there and will always be there, and how they can like recognize the importance that mental well-being has to overcome whatever issues they've come in with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, that's really exactly what it is. That's very succinct, but it is. I find the same with my clients. I mean, it's hard sometimes when. Well, it's not hard. That's a thought. We're not going to go down there. But it is. It's being there with empathy without getting caught up in the story or the weeds of what somebody's talking about. So I know that you co-wrote a book with Laurie. I'm going to say her name wrong. Carpenos, that's right. All about love. So can you tell me a bit more about that book?
Oh, sure. To me, that this book is really about the living of the principles. And because we're both marriage and family therapists, we kind of were talking, and we thought that people are for love. Like I was looking for love when I went to the conference, and but that song "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places," and so it's usually the mystery for people is how to stay in that feeling of love. They can fall in love easily, but staying in that feeling of love and then understanding how that is what brings the magic into your life.
Yeah.
So it's a book of stories, and what we did was we listened to a tape that Sydney Banks did called Thought and Marriage, and it's about relationships, right? And so we were so inspired by that we thought we would take excerpts from that tape and other quotes that he had, and then have a story that kind of is an example of how that understanding would affect various situations, and then just a short discussion afterwards. And partly that's because we think that stories are the best way to really help people to see the principles. And we wanted to keep it really as clean as possible with us talking about the principles. So we're really talking about living from an understanding of the principles. So it's actually, I think it's a good book for anybody. Because it's not, some people think it's just about couples or relationships, which a lot of the stories are. But I always tell my clients, just read it for the idea about how to live from the principles, because you might not have that specific story, but you'll have something that's like it.
That's so funny. I think when I first came across the principles, I immediately was reminded of myself when I was a teenager. And I remember thinking one day, oh my God, I can actually talk myself into loving somebody and right back out of it. I mean, I was so aware of my thinking.
Wow, that's great.
I know. And it was like, so when I came across it again, I was like, oh, I know this. We always say we know it because it's who we are. It's what we're made of. But to have that awareness, as a teenager, I thought was pretty amazing.
What a great insight.
Yeah. So basically, once you found that love within yourself and moved to Hawaii, you did find love and marriage. And
I did, yes. I've been married, this year will be 29 years.
Wow, it's amazing. I was sharing with Elsie the other day that is something so beautiful about most of the first generation teachers. I just see that they have these incredibly fresh, beautiful, alive relationships. So would you attribute, I think the principles is definitely what keeps that. I know the understanding of separate realities has helped me immensely in my relationships, not to expect my partner to see the world as I do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'll tell you, we've gone through a lot. My husband's middle son got really gravely ill and died when he was 25. we've been back and forth to the mainland a couple of times, and not having the principles would not we would not have made it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because without understanding that what I feel comes from me, it's like that's such a powerful thing for me in my relationship. And so what comes from him is his deal, it's not mine. And understanding that and knowing to always go back to the feeling, like that's one of the things that we do is we just do things by feel. And we both are on the same page with that, so we both get into a good feeling about whatever it is we want to do, and then we do it. And that's been such a gift. And honestly, I mean, I couldn't have met a better man than it took me a long time to meet him, but when I met him, he was exactly perfect. And so I told him when we got married, I said, honey, that if we're getting married, we'll never get divorced. And he said, oh, well, why is that? I said, because it'd be really bad for business. And so I just absolutely wouldn't tolerate that. So you just have to be sure you want to marry me, because we're not having a divorce. So he said, oh, okay, that's great. And, honestly, that's one of the things that I think people do is they entertain the idea of divorce.
Yeah.
And so it makes it something that's plausible, or something that's a possibility. Whereas if you know that the only thing that's wrong in any relationship is negative thought, it seems silly to go through all that drama and pain and suffering.
Yeah, I know, exactly. That's wonderful that you knew it before you got married, and you didn't have to go through that. Having.
Had I gotten married before I learned the principles, I would never have stayed married to anybody.
Yeah.
And it was a blessing in that way. But yeah, I met him, and then he was single at the time. He'd been divorced, and his children were with his ex-wife. And then about 6 months later, I got all 3 kids. So I
Instant
went
family.
from not ever living with a man, to being married and having 3 sons that were all teenagers. So
oh wow,
it was. I often said that I didn't ever write this book, but I was going to write a book called How to Be Hated and Still Keep Your Self-Esteem: The Guide to Step Parenting.
That's a great book. I'm sure that's actually.
Yeah. It's going to come.
Yeah.
But I had to wait till they're old enough that I could write it and laugh at it.
That's so funny. So if you were going to sort of leave our listeners with just anything to really, on the subject of relationships, and anybody that is contemplating, or I notice for myself, depending on my mood, I could be sort of certainly not anymore, but in the beginning of my relationship I have now, there were days where I'd be going, oh, I don't know if we're so compatible. And now, thank goodness, I'm just like, if even that thought comes through my head for a second, I'm just like, I know it's going to pass. It's just a momentary thought, and I'm not going to pay any attention to it. So that's helped me. So what would you say, it's not advice, but just words of wisdom that you would share with anybody that may be struggling with an addiction or a relationship they think is failing, and they were coming to see you? What's some of the things you would leave them with?
Well, I think that negative thought is the culprit in most people's suffering. And it's easy to get caught up in our thinking and not know it, because it really looks like it's the other person. It looks like it's the problems in our life. It looks like it's what's out there that's making us feel bad. And so when we're caught in the illusion that thought creates, that the outside world is what creates our experience, then we try to fix the outside world so that we feel better. But it just doesn't work. And so instead of saying like, oh, this doesn't work, we don't turn around and say, let's do it the other way. Maybe I need to change where I'm at, and then how I see the outside world will change.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the magic of it, like living in love and coming from love. So like for me, I try to not interact. I don't do this all the time. I do my best, but I get caught up in my thinking too. But coming from love is the most powerful thing that I've ever done. Like, to see that that's something I could consciously do. Like, don't say this until you can come from a place of love with this person.
Yeah.
And then, so to me, whether that's like dealing with an addiction is the same thing. It's like you're just looking for love, and in doing something to yourself, you're looking for a good feeling by doing something to make you feel better, without realizing that that's built into you, that everything you need and want is already inside you.
That's so beautiful. And it's so true. It's so true. I found myself, big confession here, I found myself like sort of being a bit nitpicky a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, my boyfriend knows the principles. We've been together for 9.5 years now. But he, in that moment, he's such a sweet, sweet man. And he went, I'm going to try really hard not to do that. And I'm like, no, don't bother. It's okay. It's just, I need to change my thinking. You don't need to do anything. Yeah. But it was so funny. I just caught myself in that moment going, oh my God. But we forget. And it's just natural. But it's the resilience. It's the being able to go, oh, I recognize what I'm doing right now. I'm just having some negative thinking, and I'm not, as you say, not coming from love. But,
my husband is Hawaiian, and he grew up in a culture that does not value a busy mind. So my Achilles heel is I get going too fast in my head, doing too many things, and my husband will bristle a little bit. Like, if I'm going too fast, he'll be like, and I know now that when he does that, I'm going too fast. So he's like my mirror. He helps me to see. And that's one of the things that makes it perfect for him for us is that, he's he naturally grew up in a world understanding about aloha, which is that living in a beautiful state of mind, living in mental well-being.
Wow.
So he's been, I always say that he keeps me honest.
Yeah.
I don't get to indulge in negativity on the side.
That's perfect. That's where you found yourself too, in that culture, as you say, where that's valued. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. This has been amazing, and goes very fast, half an hour, but thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
Oh, thank you so much, Del. I really appreciate all that you're doing to help spread the principles in the world. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you too. Okay, bye-bye.